Hey guys, in this episode we're gonna be talking about one of the biggest mafia operations FBI has ever conducted, Donnie Brasco. So in short, Donnie Brasco is an FBI agent, is a field agent from Italian background. So FBI thinks he can just penetrate mafia families in New York City. Actually, the operation leads to that. So if you're ready, let's roll. Donnie Brasco, real name Joseph Pistone, is an Italian-American who grew up in New Jersey in an Italian family. Pistone, who played basketball and football in high school, married at the age of 20 after studying at the college for 2 years. After college, he worked in construction and operated a bulldozer. Even bartending was among the many jobs he tried. Pistone, whose wife was a nurse, soon had a daughter with her. He would have 2 more daughters in the future. Pistone entered the Office of Naval Intelligence after this. This office was a specialized agency that investigated crimes involving naval officers and Marines, and included all types of crimes like murder, gambling, drugs, and even espionage. Pistone worked here for the first time in joint operations with the FBI, and from that point on, his dream was to become an FBI agent. However, in order for this to happen, it was necessary to have at least 3 years of experience in another office. Therefore, Pistone entered the FBI exams after completing 3 years in this naval intelligence. He passed the written, oral, and physical tests in 1969, becoming an FBI agent. After 14 weeks of training, he began his mandatory field duty in Jacksonville, Florida. Fugitives, gambling, and bank robberies became specific areas of Pistone's investigations during these years. Pistone, who was already from the street, got many informants on the streets. Pistone, who also worked with prostitutes, reportedly saved many prostitutes from the pimps who used violence against these women. By the way, in these years, meaning by the end of the 1960s, the FBI did not have an undercover program for such a long time or did not carry out such operations. Undercover job was mostly very short term, as they lasted just a week or two, during which the agents arranged fake deals with dealers and made arrests. So the criminal role agents played lasted very short time. Therefore, an undercover operation like Donnie Brasco, which would last for 6 years, was completely new for the FBI these days. Meanwhile, Pistone received special trainings from the FBI. Among them were many specific trainings such as gambling or even undercover spying, and received training in areas such as SWAT training and training for hostage situations. He mastered using many different weapons. He even received training for harsh weather conditions, almost at the level of military training. Physically, he always successfully completed these trainings. In 1974, Pistone was transferred to New York. Here, his job was to stop cargo truck robberies in the beginning, especially at JFK Airport in New York, where gangsters from the Gambino and Lucchese families often robbed them. Among these hijackers were famous figures of the future like John Gotti and Joe Massino. They stole the cargo and sold the goods either to fences or sold themselves under the counter. During his mission to take down these gangs, Pistone would begin working undercover. He was first tasked with taking down a vehicle theft gang whose area of operations stretched from Florida to Baltimore and New York. During his mission to take down these gangs, Pistone would begin working undercover. He was first tasked with taking down a vehicle theft gang whose area of operations stretched from Florida to Baltimore and New York. Knowing how to drive bulldozers and trucks due to his past work experience, Pistone was perfect fit for infiltrating the gang that stole these types of vehicles as well as cars. Pistone also received training from an informant from the gang who cooperated with the Bureau for this task and learned the details of stealing a car. As they searched for a name for the operation, Pistone recalled a random name that just came to his mind: Donald Brasco, or more often as he would be called in the future, Donnie Brasco. From this point on, Pistone's transformation into Brasco had begun. The Donnie Brasco operation took longer than expected and lasted up to 6 months. In this process, Pistone did not carry anything related to the office, including his FBI ID card. Donnie literally worked alone in the street, putting his life at stake every night. As part of this gang that stole 5 to 10 vehicles in a week, Brasco, who committed high adrenaline tasks every night, began to hang out with ex-convicts, gunmen, and other dark characters. He even attended the weekend barbecue parties of this thief gang. On the top of that, Brasco even spent money out of his pocket during the operation. As we just said, since this type of operation was new to the FBI, the Bureau did not used to pay very high sums to agents like Pistone. In February 1976, the robbery gang operation was successfully completed. A 30-man gang was busted, and $1 million worth of stolen cars were seized in Florida, Pennsylvania, and many other states. In today's money, that figure is over $5 million. Pistone, on the other hand, received only a letter of recommendation and a $250 award as a result of his success, which is worth $1,300 today. Honestly, a modest price for what he achieved. After this, the FBI started to think 6-month-long undercover operations were worth the effort. The Bureau discovered that this method was more successful than using informants. So Joseph Pistone put on the Brasco costume again, and in 1976 he went after the big fencers who sold the stolen items they received from the Mafia. Knowing the streets, Pistone was the best man for the job. His Italian origin was also an important point for the Italian Mafia members who would accept him easily. Even in the office, Donnie Brasco's new operation was handled with great secrecy. Only 4 to 5 people were aware of the operation and no one else knew his name. In this role, Donnie would also work in coordination with Joseph Fitzgerald, who was also an undercover agent in Miami. Thus, the two agents would be able to prove that they also had an underworld network and they would build their credibility over each other. This operation was named the Sun Apple, the Sun of Miami and the Big Apple of New York. Credit cards, a social security number, driver's license, and similar documents were produced in the name of Donnie Brasco. Under this name, Donnie made connections in California and Florida, and in the future he was to use these connections to convince the Mafia members in New York that he was connected. A false past was also created for Donnie Brasco. According to this scenario, Donnie was a jewel thief who spent many years in Miami and California. He was single and orphaned, so he grew up in an orphanage. For this slide, they picked an orphanage that was burnt down years ago, so that it would be impossible to confirm Donnie's existence, for the records of the orphanage were destroyed by the fire. The reason for choosing his career as a jewelry thief was that jewelry thieves usually did not get involved in violent crimes. They didn't get into risky situations like the other armed robbers did. In the future, when he would become a Mafia crew member, this would enable Donnie to pass up risky heist jobs. For the rest of the gang would believe Donnie had nothing to do with guns and his profession was different. Also, the jewelry thieves worked alone, so Donnie naturally didn't have a gang or partner in the past, which made Pistone's job easier. For his new role, Pistone received a 2-week training session covering alarm systems, tracking systems, jewelry-related details, and more. He even received this training from a gemstone specialist from a jewelry company in New York. After a crash course in gems and coins, Donnie Brasco was ready for the streets. The operation had the budget of $15,000, and it was to last only 6 months. Initially, all of Pistone's FBI records were wiped and he returned to streets as Donnie Brasco in September. Donnie arranged everything himself, like his stay or his car, and never involved the Bureau. He also created several fake business records. He even set up contacts with people who would call the places he hanged out and ask for Donnie, so that Donnie's ID, his credibility, would be strengthened. Donnie bought a '76 Cadillac DeVille with Florida plates, a gangster favorite. He also started to pay more attention to his clothes. He started wearing chain bracelets and a pinky ring in order to look like a wise guy. He told his wife Maggie to call the flat where he was staying only in case of an emergency. Other than that, he told her to never call him. This was because gangsters could also wiretap, and such calls could be risky. Pistone didn't tell his wife that he would infiltrate the Mafia, but he explained that he went undercover. Donnie Brasco targeted a few joints first and visited them often. He was hanging out in bars, restaurants and clubs 7 days a week. Some of these were Mafia related while others were just casual places. He usually hung out in Midtown or South Manhattan. When Brasco visited these places, he didn't talk much. He had a few drinks and ate some, sat for a while and left. He didn't want to draw too much attention or seem overly interested. He also didn't visit the Mafia's main neighborhoods like Little Italy, which would be going over the top for the beginning. Also, he didn't know anybody from there yet. Donnie Brasco chatted with the bartenders first. Greetings with acquaintances soon progressed to conversations, but Donnie didn't go too far so as not to overdo it. He was also careful not to spend too much money, because those who spend too much money on the streets would either become a target of scammers or turn out to be undercover cops. So in summary, the key to his success was to build up awareness and recognition by hanging out and staying low-key as much as possible. Then on, Donnie started frequenting Carmelo's restaurant, which belonged to the members of the Genovese family. Pistone used to drink very little and was not a smoker, so as Donnie Brasco, he really hated listening to drunk people. After drinking a glass of Scotch whiskey, he usually continued the night with club soda. After 2 or 3 months like this, Donnie started participating in the backgammon tournaments that took place at Carmelo's. Here, gangsters played backgammon for the bets up to $1,000, which is about $5,000 today. To participate in these games, Donnie learned how to play backgammon and joined the games. He lost some money but gained more recognition. Therefore, he started to have short conversations with the other regulars. He furthered the conversation with the bartender named Marty. When Marty asked him what he was doing, he didn't give a clear answer, giving him vague replies. These implied that he could be a criminal. When Marty offered to hang out with him, Donnie didn't rush and turned down the offer. This was in order not to make himself look like a needy man, so lonely and desperate to make friends. Also, Donnie would occasionally go to these joints with women to show that he wasn't a cop or gay, which was unacceptable in the gangster world. He didn't have serious relationship with these women, he only saw them to pass time or flirt. From time to time, he would go to these places with undercover agents like himself. While he was hanging out around these places, the connections he had set before made phone calls to the place he was at and asked if Donnie was around. Thus, in Marty's eyes, Donnie Brasco became a real character with real connections. The Carmelo's place laid the groundwork for Donnie Brasco's credibility. When someone asked who he was, anyone in New York would say Donnie was a friend who had been hanging out at Carmelo's for 5 or 6 months. So Donnie built a trust. All these little details created a recognition for Donnie. Therefore, in the future, for example, when he had a conversation with other gangsters in Brooklyn, etc., when asked who Donnie was, the people would say he had been hanging out around for 5 or 6 months. Since people were familiar with Donnie, it would be easier for him to be accepted in the environment. So long story short, Donnie created a starting point for the operation. Normally, in a routine undercover work, the cops would just act as the buyer to make arrests. So Donnie Brasco wanted to do the opposite. And contrary to the common practice, he brought along some jewelry. Once when no one else was at the bar, Donnie opened a purse containing diamond rings, wristwatches, and similar valuables and told Marty he could sell them for $2,500. So after the bartender bought them from Donnie for $2,500, he would be able to sell them by putting his profits on the top of it. Marty thus assumed that Donnie had stolen them and did not ask any more questions. Meanwhile, all these jewelry were given to Donnie by the FBI. These were the goods that were obtained from the other investigations, and thus, when Marty found the price too high, Donnie took them from Marty instead of selling them cheap. Again, this was to strengthen his role and strengthen his image as a greedy gangster. So he didn't agree right away in order not to act like a desperate cop selling things cheap. On the contrary, he behaved like a real thug and never wanted to sell the goods for less than their value. It was these small nuances that were critical to Donnie's acceptance in this world. Through this type of business, Marty introduced Donnie to some connections from the Mafia world. They were not made guys, but they were working for the Colombo family. Meanwhile, Donnie could only go home at night and spend time with his family at breakfasts. Over the next 6 years, his relationship with his family would wear out and his marriage would even fall apart. In order to take care of his wife, Pistone introduced some of his agent friends' wives to his own wife so that they would not leave his family alone. Thus, a solidarity began among the families of the agents. That way, in an emergency while Pistone was on duty, these people could come to his wife Maggie's aid. Pistone, who told his neighbors that he was a salesperson, tried to dispel their suspicions as well. Leaving his Pistone persona at home, Donnie returned to the streets and began to hang out with the Colombo family associate named Albert. They even spent Christmas together. In the first year of the operation, Donnie also met Jilly Greca through Albert. Jilly, one of the important associates of the Colombo family, was of a medium build, being 5 years older than Donnie. Jilly ran a grocery store in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, where he played cards with his crew in the back room, where they usually met to shoot the breeze and plan their next heist. Their main area of interest was robberies and heists. At the store site, they usually sold the items they had stolen the night before. Bensonhurst neighborhood at the time had a strong sense of community, and foreigners were easily picked up, so Donnie needed Jilly to stick around. And after a certain time, Donnie was tailed by the cops and gangsters, which is why he developed the habit of using different routes to where he was heading. He was also stopped by cops several times, for the police thought he was a new player on the streets. Donnie started chatting with thugs in Jilly's crew, aged between 20 and 40. He formed relationships with the main muscle of the gang, Guido, Vito, Vinny, and others. Over time, Donnie became one of the boys and began to hang out with them frequently. Now he was included in their conversations. After the team trusted Donnie enough, they started talking openly about crime stuff near him. Even though these were low-ranking gangsters, they were well-dressed in the style of the Italian Mafia. From warehouses to ports, from trucks to homes, there was nowhere the team wouldn't try to rob. In their spare time, the team planned a new heist around the clock, brainstorming about them at length. When the topic wasn't a robbery, they were gossiping about the issues related to Mafia politics. They talked about the places they were imprisoned in the past, the crimes they committed, and even the murders were among the topics they talked about frequently. What surprised Donnie was that these men remembered all the details down to the names of the guards in prisons. The team's routine was to skip lunch with a fast food or a sandwich and go home at 4 p.m. to eat with their families. Later at night, the team would meet outside again, either to commit robbery or intervene in New York's nightlife. Donnie hooked up with Jilly's crew and began attending big banquets of the Colombo family captains gave their entire crews on Tuesdays. In other words, he was solidly building the way to the heart of the Mafia world. Even at all these events, be it dinners or clubs, Jilly's team would mull over the talk of robbery and new ways of making money. Their brains were not working on anything other than these matters. Donnie was listening to all this, but his active participation in the robberies was strictly forbidden by the FBI. Because during a robbery, things could go wrong and the incident could turn into an armed situation at any moment. So the FBI didn't want to put neither Donnie nor any civilian in harm's way. When gang members wanted to take him to a heist, Donnie was able to dismiss them without arousing suspicion. Especially the fact that he was a jewel thief was a valid excuse for not participating in armed robberies. Donnie was able to build trust by offering the robbers his support in disposing of the goods. This worked for the robbers as well because they didn't have to give Donnie a cut from the heist. Donnie also tried to dissuade the gang from multiple robberies by underlining some errors in the details of the plans. By doing so, he completed the most basic duty of the police to prevent crime before it even occurred. Jilly's gang also robbed JFK airport warehouses and cargo trucks. They even worked with truck drivers in this racket and gave them a commission. Thus, the drivers were handing over their vehicles to the gang. With such robberies, the team stole coffee, sugar, whiskey, clothes, aspirin, and many other cargo products, and sold them to restaurants, supermarkets, and many other workplaces at lower price than their market price. The gang robbed houses as well. often breaking into houses for jewelry, bonds, stocks, money, and weapons. Meanwhile, according to a detail in Pistone's book, the gang was learning all details such as which house had money or which had guns from rich, drug-addicted young boys. Thus, they were collecting intelligence for the robberies they would commit through their rich boys network. Meanwhile, an event occurred that inspired a scene in the movie. Guido got suspicious of Donnie one day and ripped off the dashboard of his car and searched the car for wire. Donnie of course was quite angry and resentful at this according to his role. He challenged Guido and nearly got into a fight with him, saying, "Do you think I'm a cop?" Guido somehow reassured Donnie and told him that such doubts were normal as he was a new face. This was how Donnie understood that he should never carry a bugging device during his mission. And indeed, Donnie would never carry a bugging device except for wiretapping places. He would keep in mind everything that could constitute criminal evidence during the day and would record them as soon as he returned to his apartment in the evening. He would immediately share them with the other agents. Also, Donnie recently delivered the perfumes he bought from the robbers to the FBI on the pretext of selling stolen perfume. In return, he received money. And again, as before, he took some valuable watches and jewelry from the FBI and continued to sell them on the street. Thus, he kept his credibility intact as a thief. Gilly and his group began to trust and believe in Donnie. It was during one of the nights with Gilly and his crew, Donnie's path crossed with Tony Mirra, one of the Bonanno family's most feared soldiers on the streets. Mirra, whom Donnie met at a disco, spent 18 years of his life in prison for crimes like drug dealing and was newly released from prison. A gangster to the core, Mirra was involved in many crimes from gambling to drugs and extortion, as he usually earned his money from these activities. Having carried out perhaps more than 25 executions, Mirra was instilling fear in anyone who stood in his way. For Donnie, the Mirra connection was a development that would change the course of the operation. Meanwhile, Donnie took a risk and tried to sell some stolen jewelry himself without notifying the bureau. Thus, he sold $200,000 worth goods, and with this move, his street reputation was further strengthened. In the meantime, Gilly got made and became a full member of the Colombo family. He would now have to share all the money he made with his superiors, and he would be expected to report them his robberies up front. Of course, in these processes, subordinates always underestimated the revenues to their superiors, thus reducing the commission they would pay. Still, Gilly and his team were now beginning to take on a greater responsibility in the Mafia hierarchy. According to Donnie's testimonies, Mafia captains were indeed greedy men. The captains also determined the monetary policies of their crew somehow autonomously. For example, some captains demanded a certain percentage from each job, while others demanded weekly payments from their underlings. Meanwhile, the FBI did not arrest or raid even though they knew all the robberies Donnie talked about. Otherwise, Donnie could have been exposed and killed for even the slightest suspicion. The robberies were recorded for the future trials. Gilly and his crew continued their robberies by breaking into houses, now with the practice of disguising as police or detectives. Again, Donnie somehow refused to participate in these robberies, but some of the crew members started to doubt Donnie. Patsy and Frankie from Gilly's crew had made their suspicions about Donnie clear. The duo also requested a background check on Donnie from Gilly. Donnie of course immediately objected and acted like he couldn't get over his pride, fulfilling his gangster role. Resenting both men, Donnie began to be questioned by Patsy. Patsy asked him about the robberies he claimed to have committed in Miami, saying that he suspected that no one knew about them. While Donnie objected, he mentioned his contacts in Miami and said they could talk to them if they wanted, though he did so after much insistence. Thus, he made others accept that he was making it a matter of pride. Gilly and his crew then called Donnie's Miami contacts to confirm his background. Still, Donnie stood up and punched one of the men, causing a scuffle within the team. Finally, the crew's heavyweight Guido intervened and ended the matter. Guido and Gilly were convinced that Donnie was solid, and they made the others accept it. But these two underrated men, Patsy and Frankie, were absolutely right in their suspicions. Ironically, Patsy would become a confessor in the future and enter the witness protection program. But around this time, Donnie's relationship with Tony Mirra changed the course of the operation. Through Mirra, Donnie met Benjamin Ruggiero, nicknamed Lefty Guns or Lefty, who would become his mentor in the mob life. Although Lefty didn't seem as ruthless as Mirra, he was a cold-blooded hitman who had done dozens of murders for the Bonanno family. Lefty, who ran a social club, was a slim, thin-faced man in his early 50s. He was about 6 feet tall. Donnie told Lefty that he was from California but spent a long time in Miami. He also revealed his relationship with Gilly's crew. From this point on, Donnie began frequenting Lefty's club in Little Italy to meet Mirra. Meanwhile, Donnie had to divide his time between Mirra, Lefty, and Gilly. Still, Donnie wasn't on the record with any of them, so he was allowed to hang out as a freelancer gangster. He would occasionally go to Miami to support the undercover agent Fitz there to gain credibility as well. Thus, the gangsters in Miami saw them together and their credibility indirectly increased. One day in Miami, a local gangster offered Donnie some cocaine, but Donnie smashed the cocaine by hitting the guy's arm and refused it harshly. Pistone, who was enrolled, thus drew the boundaries and created the image of a tough guy who adhered to his principles. In this process, Donnie began to neglect the roles of his true identity, Pistone. He missed their daughters' birthdays and a wedding anniversary. He could only spend 2 or 3 nights a month at home with his family. For the rest of his time, he had to live the life required by the seemingly endless operation, which seemed to have deviated from its purpose, wandering around with the thugs and enduring their ridiculous conversations. The topics discussed were idle, mundane stuff, like football, how the Chinese and Puerto Ricans were ruining the neighborhoods, how much better a Cadillac was than a Lincoln, how the US ought to drop the bomb on Iran, how the law ought to burn rapists, etc. Of course, what was going on in the world of the Mafia was also a frequently discussed topic. In the process, Donnie tried to keep in mind every face he saw, every name he heard, along with every license plate and every gun serial number he saw, to record them when he returned home at night. Donnie and the Bureau finally decided that the Bonannos were a more solid route than Gilly. So Donnie stopped hanging out with Gilly in the summer of 1977 and started hanging out with Lefty and Mirra in Little Italy. When the agents approached Gilly about Donnie, Gilly stood firm and gave no information. Donnie would learn these from the other side, the FBI, as he was an agent. Gilly was indeed a stand-up guy, but Gilly's family was beginning to think he was an informant. In 1980, Gilly was killed by gunfire from a motorcycle approaching him while he was waiting at a red light. But Donnie, aka Agent Pistone, knew that Gilly wasn't really an informant. Gilly had been killed on a false suspicion. Pistone, on the other hand, would express that although he bonded with these men, it was always business, so that he was not too upset in such situations. His job was to put bad guys in jail. Therefore, he states in his book that he did not experience any problems in terms of conscience. But as you will witness later on, Donnie bonded with some gangsters beyond the boundaries of the mission, and this could, at some point, come to be seen as a treason from a human standpoint. Tony Mirra was by far the most psychotic gangster Brasco had ever met. Mirra, a burly, ruthless killer who stood at 6 feet 2 inches tall, was always in an unstable mood. An unpredictable personality, Mirra always carried a knife in his pocket. He also had a reputation for being good at using a knife. Also on parole, Mirra preferred to carry a knife rather than a gun to avoid going back to prison. Those who knew him would never come within arm's length of Mirra, because when Mirra got angry, he was famous for pulling out a knife very quickly and piercing the other person with holes. Even other hitmen feared this quality of him. Mirra, who was always in trouble, could not make friends with anyone, even in the underworld. He was an antisocial character who constantly cursed, humiliated, made fun of people, intimidated them, and bullied them, so even the worst thugs would not come close to him. For example, one day he would just say okay to someone who asked how he was, and the next day, to the same question, he replied, "What the fuck you so nosy about?" But despite all these features, Mirra was a gangster who could make money quick when he wasn't in jail. He never paid a tab at any place he went with Donnie, and he never made those around him pay. He extorted some of these places, and when Donnie tried to pay the bill, he would scold him, saying nobody would go out with Mirra and pay a tab in his presence. Donnie was also involved in a bar fight with Mirra. When Donnie punched a man who was teasing him for some reason, Mirra attacked the guy next to the man and backed Donnie. Later, when the incident was over, Mirra also asked Donnie why he didn't stab the man. For Mirra, such things were normal as shopping. But for Donnie, aka Pistone, it was embarrassing to be involved in a bar fight as a 38-year-old man. Sometimes Mirra also told Donnie to watch the bartender or the manager carefully, because Mirra didn't want them stealing money from the places he was extorting. Mirra used to earn $5,000 a week from shaking down these joints, which today amounts to about $25,000. Mirra once got angry in one of those places and placed Donnie at the door. There, Donnie collected money from everyone who entered the place. By doing this type of stuff, Mirra would sometimes go over $5,000 profit. Also extremely cruel to his girlfriends, Mirra had always played a toxic role in his relationships and ruined his lovers. One time, while Mirra was talking on a payphone, he got so angry at the old woman waiting in the line that Donnie stopped dead in his tracks. As many gangsters did, Mirra had long conversations on payphones, because these phones usually weren't tapped. On one occasion, while Donnie was waiting as Mirra talked on the phone, an old lady approached Mirra. She had been waiting for a long time, and she kindly asked if he was finished. An angry Mirra then told her, "Listen, you fucking cunt, I'm using this phone, I'm finished. Shut your fucking mouth or I'll cut you." The psychopathic Mirra's private life was as turbulent as his criminal life. Mirra was boasting about how he participated in group sex with movie actresses. Mirra also owned slot machines and illegally installed them in many places in New York. He was making about $2,000 a week from this racket. When the owners refused to accept his machines, Mirra simply told them to ask about Tony Mirra from Mulberry Street. Almost everyone who learned who he was accepted the machines unconditionally. Mirra, in his 50s, had spent more than half his life in prison for such crimes. Donnie, on the other hand, did not want to be too tight with him due to his abusive character, but thanks to Mirra, Donnie was in a position to meet big Mafia figures such as Michael Zaffarano, one of the captains of the family. Zaffarano owned several theaters in Times Square that played porn movies. In fact, Zaffarano had a heart attack and died while fleeing the FBI's raid during the operation to crack down the illegal porn industry. In this process, Donnie became a regular at Lefty's club and participated in gambling games that directed by Lefty. This joint was a social club exclusively for the members of the Bonanno family. Since Lefty was also a bookie, Donnie made him bet his money a few times. In fact, Brasco was nicknamed Donnie instead of Donald because Lefty started calling Brasco Donnie. Within time, Donnie started bonding with Lefty. Lefty was always talking about money making, just like Jilly and his crew. The things he talked about were usually bets, games, street lottery, and robberies. Donnie finally told Lefty that he was a jewel thief. Lefty, on the other hand, was a notorious gambler and frequently asked Donnie for loans. But Donnie didn't want to look like a sucker and tried to reject them. When Lefty insisted, he tried to save the situation by, for example, giving him $200 if he wanted $500, not to give him the exact amount. This practice, that is, the superiors taking this type of money from their subordinates, was actually a common practice in the Mafia world. And of course the debts were not paid. They simply preyed on their underlings. Also, it wasn't just out of necessity. For example, when Lefty needed to spend money during the day, instead of spending his own, he always asked Donnie for money. Lefty was working under the family's underboss, Nicky Marangelo, on the betting operation. Marangelo had high-profile clients, playing for close to $200,000. Also, Marangelo had a social club called Toyland, and those who had business with him would come here to meet him one-on-one. No one would sit inside. Everyone waited at the door, entered when it was their turn, and left. After a while, Donnie started helping Lefty with his bets. He became Lefty's right-hand man, both in managing money traffic and in placing bets. Moreover, Lefty was not abusive like Mirra. And unlike Mirra, he didn't enjoy violence, especially when it was unnecessary. Donnie also met Lefty's captain, Mike Sabella, at the time. So now, Donnie was meeting high-ranking members of the Bonanno family. He also met the Zips faction of the family, the faction that was close to the boss of the family, Carmine Galante. Galante was known for importing members for the family from Sicily. He brought Sicilians into the US illegally via Canada, where the Bonannos had connections. He used them especially in narcotics trafficking. These men were unknown to the US officials. They didn't have any criminal records in America. And for their fast-speaking patterns and heavy accents, these men were called Zips. Totally untraceable, they sold heroin at the pizza parlors they ran. The Zips were a closed group dedicated to Galante, as they acted as Galante's Praetorian guards. And the Zips were relentless, and unlike American mafiosi, they didn't have problems with killing cops or judges. And the most prominent Zip at the time was Cesare Bonventre. The FBI learned this new wave of Sicilian immigrants thanks to Donnie Brasco, who by this time had problems with Mirra. Mirra and Lefty didn't want to share Donnie, whom they considered as a money source. So each of them didn't want Donnie to hang out with the other. Donnie saw that Mirra was more talented in money making than Lefty. Recently released from prison, Mirra had just made $200,000, which is equal to $1 million today. But Mirra was extremely antisocial, and his abusive behavior disgusted other mobsters. Lefty, on the other hand, was respected. Thus Donnie chose Lefty. Lefty then made a call to Gilly to do a background check on Donnie. Donnie got checked out, so Lefty comfortably took him under his wings. Lefty now had to go to the captains of the family to identify Donnie as a member of his crew. By doing so, Lefty was watching for Donnie. Then Lefty started schooling Donnie on the mob life, namely on being a wise guy. He wanted Donnie to remove his mustache, shorten his hair, and never to wear jeans again. This was also shown in the movie where Al Pacino told Johnny Depp's character about the dress code. Dress like I dress was the way he put it. Lefty introduced Donnie to the other members of the family as a friend of mine. That meant Donnie wasn't connected, he wasn't a made guy, he was just an associate. Had he said this is a friend of ours, that would mean Donnie was made, strengthened out, meaning an official member of the family. Yet friend of mine also meant Donnie was connected to Lefty, or under Lefty. From now on, Donnie had to report every move he made to Lefty. He couldn't leave the city without Lefty's approval. Also, he had to cut Lefty in on whatever money he made. Also, Lefty taught him how to talk about crime stuff indirectly, never to mention last names, never to fuck around with other guys' wives or mistresses. On any dispute, any beef, Donnie had to take sides with the made guy if the other party wasn't made. As Lefty believed, a made guy was always right, even when he was wrong. Another rule was to never raise hands to a made guy. This was strictly against the rules. Lefty also told Donnie that if he abided by these rules and committed himself, he could become a made guy someday. But Donnie didn't disconnect from Mirra right away. During the day, he hung out with Lefty, and at night he was with Mirra, hanging out. During one of these nights, Mirra started scolding a waitress for some redundant reason. Donnie intervened, and this time, in front of some other friends, Mirra shut him up and scolded Donnie. Mirra went on with insulting Donnie and asking if he was trusting Lefty to stand up to himself, reminding that Lefty would not be able to protect him. Mirra finished by saying, "You're with me, and you keep your fucking mouth shut if you wanna keep breathing." And Donnie replied, "Tony, you're right, I was probably out of line." Fuming for having to cave in, Donnie went to Mirra next day. As they walked, Donnie told him he respected him, but the next time when something like that happened, he would get him for this. According to Pistone, Mirra then just said, "You're okay with me, I like you." Of course, we get all this information from Pistone's statements, thus the story might be different. We can never be sure about how Mirra reacted. Donnie started spending more time with Lefty though. Lefty was born and raised in Little Italy, so everybody on the street knew him well. Lefty was also a good cook, and he invited Donnie over and cooked for him. Divorced from his wife, Lefty was now living with his girlfriend Louise. He was harsh and rude to her sometimes, but Louise tolerated him. Despite his behavior, Lefty was loyal to Louise, who worked as a secretary. In the future, Pistone was to say that Louise was one of those few people who he felt sorry about after the operation was over. Donnie also met the 4 children Lefty had from his former wife. One of them, Marco, was a drug addict, and Donnie tried to set him straight, mentoring Marco every once in a while. Donnie was also the best man when Lefty married Louise. On one occasion, Lefty asked Donnie if he ever killed anybody. Donnie told him that he had killed people in the past, but these weren't like Mafia hits, but instead they happened during a fight or a shooting he had to go through. Lefty then schooled Donnie about the proper Mafia hit. He told Donnie that a Mafia hit was nothing like killing someone over an argument. He told him hits never included personal feelings, as the executioner usually didn't even know why he was hitting the guy. These were totally professional killings, and Lefty told him he usually used .22 caliber pistol in these hits, for .22 would do the job without piercing through the target's head. So to say, it didn't leave much mess or blood after the hit. Lefty told Donnie he would take him along the next hit, which sent shivers down Donnie's spine. Donnie, or Agent Pistone, started to think how could he handle a situation like that, which became sort of a paranoia for him. Donnie, meaning Agent Pistone, came to the resolution that he would kill the target if he was a gangster rather than risking himself. And by the summer of 1977, Donnie was a member of the crew, so to say, one of the boys. Now he was allowed to enter anywhere and greet everyone. Donnie got to know Lefty better too. He found out Lefty had never been in prison and that he still wasn't made. The reason for he wasn't made was the fact that Lefty was in debt with almost everybody. Plus, he was an unlucky gambler, which fueled his debts. He was extremely unlucky both in card games and horse track. As any degenerate gambler, his mind was always on the next big win, and meanwhile, he kept losing tons of money. Nonetheless, 1977 was the year that Lefty got made, a full-fledged member of the Bonanno family. Around this time, the family was led by Carmine Galante, who was recently released from prison. Galante, who always had a cigar in his mouth, was once present for a meeting where Donnie, along with an army of Bonanno enforcers, guarded him outside, armed to the teeth. This was due to the fact that Galante had problems with the other bosses on the Mafia Commission. Lefty told Donnie that Galante was too greedy. He used the Zips to dominate the narcotics racket and crushed any other faction or the family who stood in his way. He kept people in line by the power of fear, and he was hated by even the soldiers of his own family, which was the reason for the precautions like this one. Around this time, Donnie received an order from the FBI to head for Wisconsin. The Bureau wanted him to support their operation against the crime family in Milwaukee, namely the Balistrieri family. Over in Milwaukee, Donnie got in touch with Tony Conte, another undercover infiltrating Balistrieri family. The city Milwaukee is only 93 miles away from Chicago, thus the Balistrieri family was under the influence of the Chicago outfit that rose power under Al Capone. But Frank Balistrieri was a respected boss, and early in his life he even stood up against Tony Accardo, the infamous outfit boss, over a conflict of interest. Balistrieri controlled gambling and bookmaking in Milwaukee, and also had a vending machine empire. The FBI wanted to bring Balistrieri down, hence Brasco was sent to Milwaukee. Donnie egged Lefty on to go into vending machine business by talking about the opportunities and his connections in Milwaukee. Desperate for money, Lefty loved the idea and got the approval of the boss, Galante, via his captain, Sabella. Then on, he went over to Milwaukee with Donnie. Meanwhile, Joe Pistone was going through a big challenge. His wife had a terrible car accident. Luckily, she survived, but her husband, Joe Pistone, was nowhere to be found while she was struggling to recover. Eventually, she wanted to divorce Pistone. Also, the daughters didn't see Pistone as the man of the house anymore. They didn't respect him as they used to. The girls didn't care what their father said. After all, he was gonna leave them soon again and would come back after a very long time. His wife wanted Pistone to quit his FBI job, but this was to no avail. Pistone finally admitted her that he was infiltrating a Mafia family. He shared more details to convince her that the mission was an important federal task. She then appreciated what Pistone was doing and abandoned the idea of divorce. Back in Milwaukee, Donnie and Lefty, for the first time in their lives, had met a Cosa Nostra boss in person and had a dinner with Frank Balistrieri. This was something Lefty couldn't imagine happening anywhere in New York, but now he was invited to Balistrieri's house. He was honored, and such honor cemented his loyalty to Donnie Brasco, the man who made it possible for Lefty. But the Milwaukee expedition would not last very long. All of a sudden, Frank Balistrieri simply broke off all his communication with Lefty and Donnie. Later on, Pistone heard Balistrieri somehow found out Tony Conte was an FBI agent, but it's still a mystery for why Balistrieri did not dig up dirt on Donnie Brasco. Pistone definitely had one close call. In the meantime, the Bonannos in New York couldn't care less about the stuff in Milwaukee, because the boss of the family, Carmine Galante, was assassinated. The gunmen in ski masks entered the restaurant where he had lunch and riddled Galante with bullets. Cesare Bonventre and Baldo Amato, his trusted bodyguards and the members of the Zip faction, did nothing to protect their boss while the assassins carried out their task. Lefty told Donnie about the big changes that were to come after. The imprisoned boss of the family, Philip Rastelli, aka Rusty, was the official boss again, and the Mafia Commission had approved him. One Dominic Napolitano, aka Sonny Black, was now a captain or a capo regime. Those who were close to Galante, meaning Nicky Marangelo and Mikey Sabella, were demoted. Their lives were spared, for many in the family still loved them, but nonetheless they were reduced to the rank of a soldier. But the assassination did not end the tension within the family. On the contrary, there was a greater tension. For now, the two factions within the Bonannos wanted to take over. The faction that was close to Rastelli, which included Sonny Black, Joey Massino, and was supported by the Colombo family. The rival faction was made of the three other captains in the family: Alphonse Indelicato, aka Sonny Red, Dominic Trinchera, aka Big Trin, and Philip Giccone, aka Phil Lucky. The three captains wanted to take charge without Rastelli. Allegedly, they were supported by the Genovese family. Hence, even the Mafia Commission was now picking their side among the Bonanno factions. Sonny Black, a pro-Rastelli captain, was to play a crucial role in the Donnie Brasco operation. Since Sonny Black's crew was based in Brooklyn, him and Donnie didn't come across. But now Sonny Black was the most powerful captain in the family. Cesare Bonventre, a Zip faction soldier and Galante's bodyguard, was also promoted to capo regime. Now was the time for the rising stars like him, Sonny, and Massino. The Bonanno family was reorganizing. Lefty was even asked to choose between Sonny Black and Joey Massino to join their crews. Lefty's choice was Sonny Black, which meant Donnie was now with Sonny Black crew. Knowing and trusting Rusty from the old days, Lefty was looking forward for his release. But Rusty was imprisoned since 1975 and wasn't likely to be released anytime soon. The family was in one big mess, just like once it was for Milwaukee. Donnie was now encouraging Lefty to operate down in Miami. The duo visited Miami and gambled there while looking for opportunities to make money. According to the Mafia policies, Miami was an open territory just like Vegas, meaning anybody with right permissions could operate down there. Lefty wanted to buy a joint in Miami. He was also dreaming of buying a boat. Donnie then did another big favor to win the heart of Lefty and found a boat to give a party to Lefty and his gangster friends from New York. The boat he found was used in a former FBI operation named Abscam, which was an FBI sting operation targeting the Congress members who took bribes from a fictitious Arabian company. The boat was named Left Hand, which added to Lefty's excitement while partying on it with his mob cronies. In the eyes of Lefty, this favor was off the charts. It definitely did cement their friendship beyond the mob mentor and apprentice level. Lefty wanted to pull a check fraud and also do some drug deals in Miami. Drugs were a lucrative business at the time, for in 1977, gangsters were able to buy 1 kilogram of cocaine for $5,000, which they were then able to sell on the streets of New York for $45,000. Their profit is worth $156,000 today. Regarding drugs, Lefty wanted to do it only with Donnie. But Lefty's contact guy was afraid of Brasco and thus backed down from doing business with him. By the way, the Bonanno family was flexible when it came to the drug business. They let a lot of family members deal drugs, and even the deceased boss of the family, Carmine Galante, did most of his money by drug trade. Meanwhile, Donnie Brasco's colleague, Tony Rossi, was trying to infiltrate the Trafficante family, the Mafia family that was based in Tampa, Florida. Rossi was acting as an enforcer for the boss of the family, Santo Trafficante, overseeing the gambling rackets of the family. Around this time, the FBI got the intel about Frank Balistrieri's sudden decision to break off with the Bonannos, which verified the fact that Balistrieri knew Tony Conte was an FBI agent. And since Donnie Brasco publicly admitted that Tony Conte was a friend of his, the entire operation was now jeopardized. The intel caused FBI to go on full alert and call off the entire Donnie Brasco operation. The Bureau was also worried about Balistrieri, who could easily get in touch with the Bonannos and tell them about Conte's association with Brasco, which would possibly end up with Brasco's execution. But Pistone insisted on continuing the operation. He tried to convince the Bureau that he was safe and the operation was worth the risk. Plus, Pistone told them that he didn't vouch for Conte, but only told people that he knew Conte, so the blame wouldn't automatically fall on Donnie Brasco. Finally, the Bureau was convinced and the Operation Donnie Brasco carried on. Meanwhile, Donnie suggested Lefty to buy a joint named King's Court. In partnership with Tony Rossi, Lefty started to run King's Court and his captain Sonny Black was satisfied with his work down in Miami. Donnie was to meet Sonny for the first time in King's Court, and this meeting would become another milestone in the operation. Dominic Napolitano, aka Sonny Black, was in his late 40s, was 5 feet 7 inches tall man who weighed 170 pounds. Pistone described him as having powerfully developed chest and arms with a panther tattoo on his right arm. He was swarthy with dyed jet black hair, which probably was the reason for the nickname Sonny Black. With rings under his eyes, Sonny looked both fatherly and dangerous depending on the situation. Early in his career, Sonny's crew deserted him when he was in prison, but now, especially after the Galante hit, he regained his power. And Sonny was definitely a rising star in the family with a lot of potential. Unlike Lefty and many other mobsters Donnie Brasco stuck around with, Sonny wasn't 724 gangster, meaning he had a personality beyond his mobster persona. Sonny was conversable and laid back, but he could easily get tough enough to scare the daylights out of anybody. But overall, compared to many, Sonny was calm, collected, and loyal. Upon his visit to King's Court, Sonny had one-on-one with Donnie and told him that Donnie now had to report directly to himself rather than having Lefty as a middleman. Of course, Lefty didn't like it, but he had to abide by Sonny's ruling. Still, Donnie went to Lefty and told him he would keep him in the loop no matter what Sonny said. Then a Vegas night took place in King's Court and more than 200 customers came down to drink and gamble. Tony Rossi took care of the law enforcement by bribing the local police to keep gambling going without any raids. Sonny was back in New York though. He had a bigger fish to fry. The Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, was now a fugitive who had escaped his country, Iran, after the Islamic Revolution. The Shah kept his historical artifact collection in a certain place in New York, and the Sonny Black crew was set out to steal it. The Shah's sister happened to be present while Sonny made his attempt, and now they were in a shooting with Shah's security guards. Nobody died, but the heist was failed. During all these events, the FBI was listening via the box they placed into King's Court, Agent Rossi's car, and Donnie Brasco's place in Miami. The phones used by the crew were also tapped. Even the place where Donnie lived was bugged by the device that was placed inside the walls. Agent Pistone finally managed to find enough time to attend his daughter's graduation, but he needed to go back to Miami immediately, for there was a big meeting taking place between Santo Trafficante, the head of the Trafficante family, and Sonny Black. In the meeting, Sonny received Trafficante's permission for operating in Miami. This was on the condition that Sonny would pay 50% commission to Trafficante. Then on, Sonny went to Donnie and gave him $5,000 in order to put some money on the street for a loan sharking operation. Donnie was able to keep the money until his profits hit $80,000. Sonny also wanted to build a dog race track in Miami. Reportedly, Sonny had to give up the 15 soldiers he controlled in New York in order to pursue his Miami endeavors. These soldiers were then split among the other captains in the family. The crew even went to Disneyland to celebrate the Miami expedition, where an interesting incident took place. While at the shooting gallery, Sonny was surprised at the aiming skills of Donnie and Rossi, who supposed not to use guns often. Of course, Sonny Black didn't know about their FBI special agent training. Sonny spent a lot of his leisure time with Donnie and the crew. In such times, Sonny would lower his guard and talk to them just like a friend. Donnie also got to know Judy, Sonny's girlfriend, for whom he felt deeply sorry once the operation was over. Sonny and Donnie got close. They started working out together and arm wrestled often. Donnie won all the time, but still, Sonny didn't give up and challenged Donnie again. But Sonny did this in a friendly, joyful fashion. Indeed, he liked and trusted Donnie. It was because of Sonny that Donnie had a chance to shake hands with Santo Trafficante, another Cosa Nostra boss he got so close after Balistrieri. Back in New York, Donnie started frequenting Sonny's social clubs, Motion Lounge and Wither's Italian-American War Veterans Club. Sonny let Donnie stay at his own place while in New York, saving him from the trouble of having to rent a new apartment. While they were working out, Sonny also showed Donnie the pet pigeons he kept on the roof of his place. Pigeons were a big thing for Sonny, as he knew different pigeon breeds and how to feed them with specific vitamins. Sonny even marked his pigeons with leg bands. These were also racing pigeons. The races were usually held by letting pigeons in a certain distance and timing their arrival at their home loft. The owner of the earlier group of pigeons would be the winner. According to Pistone, in his early years, Sonny Black didn't care too much about becoming a wise guy. He was a robber at first, but soon he found out he had to get the okay of the local mob boss to carry on with his robberies. This was the reason why Sonny thought it made more sense to become a wise guy and carry on with the robberies, which would make his life easier. Sonny also told Donnie about the coming storm. This was after the death of Galante. The family was in turmoil, and things could get out of hand very fast. Sonny told Donnie he was looking for a smart guy to let him run his betting and loan sharking rackets. Donnie, as Agent Pistone, seized the opportunity and recommended another undercover agent for this job. Sonny agreed since it was Donnie, his trusted confidant, who was watching for this guy. Sonny also informed Donnie about the new changes in the Mafia Commission. The Genovese family boss, Funzi Thierry, was knocked down, and Paul Castellano was the new power. And the Gambinos were eager to run drug trade with Trafficante family as well as the Bonannos. So there was more money to be made, and Sonny was on a roll. On one occasion, Donnie told Sonny that he loved the Lucky Horse Show pinky ring he was wearing, and right away, Sonny took it off to give it to Donnie as a gift. Donnie refused it right away, but the incident proved how Sonny saw Donnie as a close friend. Donnie wasn't just an underling to him, he meant a lot more. And around this time, a demon from the ancient world, Tony Mirra, was released from the prison, and now he was laying claim to Donnie, meaning he thought Donnie's supposed to be connected directly to himself. Mirra caused a series of sit-downs within the Bonannos over this issue, and during these sit-downs he claimed he was wrong, for he was the person who brought Donnie into the Bonanno family, which was technically true. Meanwhile, as an interesting thing to note, Lefty had started petting a lion cub, and walked it on the street just like walking a dog. Lefty also carried this cub around in his car, but when the cub became an adult lion, it costed Lefty $200 per day to feed it. It was almost impossible to walk it anymore, and in the car, the lion tore down Lefty's car upholstery. Finally, Lefty resolved to let the lion go by tying the lion in a park. The police found the animal at the end, and the incident made it into the headlines in the newspapers. But nobody at the time knew where the lion came from. By the way, Sonny told Donnie that he has put his name on the list of the candidate members of the family, and that he would recommend him for the full membership. So for the first time in the American history, an FBI agent was about to become a full-fledged member of a Mafia family, that is, a made man. Once, Sonny saved Donnie from getting mugged, or maybe even getting killed. While walking on a street, a mugger pulled a knife on Donnie and stood really close. As Donnie froze, Sonny circled them around and clocked the guy from behind with one punch. The mugger was knocked out. Later on, the crew was back in Florida and the King's Court was having its second Vegas night. Sonny was expecting to collect from a night-long gambling, but the police raided King's Court and the show was over. Sonny got arrested and Donnie had his ID on him, so the police let him go. Donnie paid to bail out Sonny and Rossi in the same night. The police turned King's Court upside down, got all the money from the gambling as well as the gambling devices including the slot machines. It was a total screw-up for Sonny, especially regarding his image in the eyes of Santo Trafficante. The incident made Sonny look like a cheap hoodlum, and Sonny furiously wanted to find out who was the rat, thinking someone within the crew tipped off the cops. Things were getting messy for the Bonannos. Lefty told Donnie about the big changes. While Rusty was in prison still, a captain named Sally Farrugia was appointed as the acting boss. And Sonny Black was now the biggest captain in the family. The rumor was that Sonny was to become a consigliere once Rusty was out. The Mafia Commission was also trying to control the tension within the Bonannos by warning the both sides to keep it calm until Rusty's release. A second close call for Pistone took place at this time, when Lefty saw the same boat Donnie rented for them months ago, the Left Hand, in a magazine. The article was about the app scam operation, and Lefty was very upset upon learning that they had partied on a boat owned by the FBI. But surprisingly, even this wasn't enough for Lefty to seriously doubt Donnie. In the meantime, Tony Mirra was still causing problems, and during another sit-down with the family administration, Mirra claimed Donnie sold $250,000 worth heroin without informing the family. Mirra claimed Donnie did this with another mobster named Rocky, who was also an undercover agent. Such a violation of family rules was enough to get Donnie and Rocky killed, no matter if they were agents or not. And regarding this beef, Lefty and Donnie had this fun conversation which we will now listen to.
He's a liar and Mirra's a liar.
No, you can't. Your word don't count because I'll tell you why.
Why?
Rocky already said it.
Well, he's good just because he said it first?
No, he said it first. Your word don't count, my man.
Why?
Well, like I told you. So see, I need a backup man. Now it's beyond Sonny. It's out of Sonny's hands, though. Your case. I warned you. I'm not giving you up. I'll die with you.
So what do we do now?
What do you do? So you
we just let this guy bullshit and lie to everybody?
Here's the question. You still fucking don't understand. I know I wanted you to come in, but I didn't want to scare you from coming in.
Hey, Left, I ain't afraid of anybody.
I don't give a fuck, but you can't
I ain't afraid of anybody.
You can't help me out. I have to handle it. Without you.
And I ain't afraid of Mirra either.
Look, let me tell you something.
What?
Get up your fucking high horse and call me back later.
No, I want
fucking aggravate.
No, I want to talk to you now.
No.
All right, I'll listen to you. Go ahead, I'll listen.
You want to listen to me?
Yeah, I'll listen to you. Go ahead.
When I got set for today.
Although it was Mirra who brought Donnie in, it was Lefty who brought Donnie to the recognition of high-ranking family members like Marangelo. On this basis, Mirra's claim was denied by the family, as Lefty and Mirra had a heated confrontation and Lefty reportedly stood up to Mirra for Donnie. Lefty now had dangerous thoughts about Rocky's possible cooperation with law enforcement. Long story short, Lefty became the acting captain of Sonny Black's crew. And now Lefty was briefing Donnie about the split within the family. The Zip's captain, Cesare Bomentre, was supporting Sonny Red. On the opposite side, Sonny Black and Joey Massino were drawing their strength from their closeness to Rusty, and they were supported by the Gambino family. Lefty told Donnie that he was going to follow Sonny Black in a possible mob war, and that he wouldn't hesitate having a shootout with Mirra on the street if he had to. Although Mirra was a total nutcase, he knew Lefty was a stone-cold killer, a formidable adversary, which was probably why Mirra wasn't too insistent on his beef. But now the Bonanno family was to have more than a simple beef to worry about. On one side, the boss, Rostelli, consigliere Stevie Beefs Canoni, and the captains Sonny Black and Joey Massino stood up against the rival faction, which was comprised of the captains Sonny Red, Phil Lucky, Big Trin, who were reportedly supported by Cesare Bonventre. Especially Sonny Red faction was concerned about Sonny Black's increasing power and influence, so a big mob war was looming on the horizon. Sonny Black faction first decided to hit Phil Lucky, who, according to some sources, was the designated leader in case if Sonny Red faction came to the top. But this was called off, for a way more devious plan was set in motion. Sonny Black and Joey Massino wanted to eliminate all the three captains of the rival faction at once. The idea was to leave them so weak that they wouldn't have the chance to fight back. In May, Donnie realized Lefty was nowhere to be found. He didn't pick up the phone, and according to his wife, Lefty wasn't home for days. Later, Brasco, or actually Pistone, found out about the whole thing. The three captains of the rival faction were invited to a peace meeting in Brooklyn nightclub, according to the rules of the Mafia. Nobody in such meetings is supposed to carry a firearm, a rule that the three captains abided by. But the three Capos were ambushed, and in a sudden bloodbath, all of them were shot to death. The opposition to Rusty Rostelli and Sonny Black was thus terminated. Cesare Bonventre was imprisoned at the time, so he also didn't have a chance to fight Sonny Black, and later on Bonventre also accepted Sonny Black and the new arrangements. The incident certainly worried the Bureau and made them seriously consider ending the Operation Donnie Brasco. For although the three captains were gone, Sonny Red's son Bruno and his brother Joseph were still alive. And Bruno had a reputation for being a stone-cold killer and a coke addict. So he was a potential danger. Plus Bruno had killers like Tommy Pitera in his crew, and thus he could possibly prolong the conflict. This was a risk that FBI did not want to take. After the hits, Sonny summoned Donnie to his social club to tell him that the three captains were gone, and also to ask him to check in with his contacts in Miami. Sonny suspected that Bruno and Joseph were hiding in Miami, so he ordered Donnie to kill them on sight. Sonny also warned Donnie about how dangerous Bruno could get, especially after he was coked up. So now Donnie Brasco was officially given a contract. Killing Bruno would be his ticket to become a made man in the Bonanno family. Soon after, Sonny Red's corpse was found in a lot in Ozone Park, Queens. This place was a mob graveyard for the Gambino family, as they were also in charge of getting rid of Sonny Red's body. Some kids playing around the lot found the corpse. The red cowboy boots Sonny Red wore, which probably gave him the nickname, caught their attention. The discovery was enough for the authorities to assume Big Trin and Phil Lucky were also dead. The alarm bells were ringing for Donnie Brasco. This was too much for the Bureau. Agent Pistone was given a Mafia contract, and also he was a probable target of a retaliation attempt by Bruno. The end of the 6-year-long Mafia odyssey was near, but Pistone wanted to go forward with becoming a made man, a possibility that was too risky for FBI to even think about. The Bureau decided that 26th of July was the final day of the Operation Donnie Brasco. The Bureau also decided to reveal Donnie's true identity to Sonny and the rest of the crew. The mob would always kill an informant, but the American Mafia was strictly against killing an officer. So knowing Donnie Brasco is Joseph Pistone would prevent the Bonannos from any attempt on Pistone's life. This was the Bureau's strategy about Pistone. And also the revelation would enable them to wiretap a lot of phone conversations regarding the crisis after the revelation of Donnie's true identity. They would listen to calls that would made by Sonny specifically, for he was the person who would be at the center of the information traffic. This was confirmed by his best friend Donnie, or Agent Pistone. In the last 6 weeks of the operation, Donnie tried to gather as much information as he could while playing the same role. He continued to see Lefty and Sonny. Lefty was complaining about Sonny, who he thought was getting greedy and selfish, and that Sonny did not appreciate the loyalty and efforts of the man who supported him all along. Lefty also shared some grotesque details about the three Capos murder with Donnie. He said it was Joe Massino's mistake that Sonny Red's corpse was discovered. And Big Turn was so big, so much so that when they shot him, 50 pounds of his stomach went flying. Also, according to Lefty, Bruno had a narrow escape, for he was just around the corner on his way to the nightclub when the hits took place. And nowadays, said Lefty, everybody was armed. Sonny gave Donnie a pistol and asked him to carry it along all the time. Sonny also said he officially recommended Donnie for membership to the boss of the family, that he loved Donnie like a brother and he wanted Donnie to take care of his family if something happened to him. Meanwhile, there was a rising tension between Sonny Black and Joey Massino. As Rusty was still in prison, the two were having a cold war over the future leadership of the family. Lefty was complaining about how Sonny led some soldiers in his crew to be assigned to different crews in the family. Lefty was thinking that this would weaken Sonny in the future as he let his future enemies gain too much power. Lefty Ruggiero was a chronic complainer, but as Pistone said, all of his predictions about the mob politics were correct, and the history would prove Lefty right. Ironically, Pistone spent his final day as a Donnie Brasco at Sonny's place. There they had a long conversation about Sonny's future plans for Florida. Sonny wanted to get back on track with Trafficante. He wanted to build a future in Florida with gambling, dog tracks, drugs, numbers game and more. Florida would be the place of origin for Sonny Black's future empire. Donnie then dropped Sonny off at the airport, and this was the last time the two saw each other. The day after this, Tony Rossi, the undercover agent in Miami, went to Washington, D.C. to start all the prosecution process for the crimes that took place in Milwaukee, Miami, and New York. Pistone admitted that he felt close to Sonny, but he never saw himself as a betrayer. Pistone believed these, meaning the world of gangsters and the world of civilians, were separate worlds, and that in everything he did, he was well aware that it was just a part of his job, and that Sonny would do the same had he known about the truth, and kill Donnie without a doubt. Things like unexpected revelation or Mirra's beef could easily have Pistone killed, and had the family decided so, then Lefty or Sonny would execute the order. This is of course according to what Joe Pistone says, but we will never know what Sonny's reaction would be, or if he would fight for Donnie instead of following such orders or give him up. But the fact was that some people were to pay the price for the Operation Donnie Brasco. Those who shook hands with him, those who let him in, were to die. The mob knew it, and the FBI also knew it. At the top of the list would be Tony Mirra, the very first made man who brought Donnie in, and then Lefty for consolidating Donnie's position within the crew, and finally Sonny Black for letting Donnie Brasco to almost become a made man. Considering his rank, the heaviest price for such a big fiasco would probably be inflicted on Sonny, and even before the operation was over, Pistone predicted this. But at the end of the day, Pistone believed it was the rules he lived by that would also cause Sonny's demise. At least this was what he told himself. According to Pistone, Sonny's fate wasn't a matter of conscience for him, so his heart or his conscience was at ease with what was about to happen. 2 days after his return to New York, FBI agents visited Sonny's club and revealed that Donnie Brasco was an FBI agent named Joseph D. Pistone. They showed Pistone's pictures with other FBI agents. Yet the agents did not ask Sonny to cooperate in order not to insult his dignity. So Sonny simply told them he didn't know what the person they were talking about. The next thing Sonny did was to summon his crew, meaning Lefty, Booby Sersani, and Nicky Santora. He shared the bad news with them, but reportedly he still couldn't believe that Donnie was a federal agent. It took a week for Sonny to finally accept the fact. By this time the news were all over the place. Santo Trafficante, Rusty Rostelli, and even Paul Castellano now knew about the whole Donnie Brasco deal. So for the executives of the mob, it was a time for damage control. First they put a $500,000 contract on Pistone's life. But this was later retracted by Paul Castellano. The next decision was to punish those who were responsible for Donnie's rise within the family. On August 14, 17 days after the revelation, Sonny Black was summoned to a house in New Jersey. Anticipating what was about to happen, Sonny gave his jewelry and keys of his house to the bartender of his club. Once at the meeting place, his killers pushed him down the staircase to the basement and shot him. Reportedly, the first shot misfired, and Sonny Black told his killers, "Hit me one more time and make it good." Sonny Black didn't consider neither flipping nor escaping. Being a criminal he was, he accepted his fate and took it without hesitation. Before the corpse was found, the agents knew Sonny was gone, for Pistone told them to wash his pigeons Sonny kept on the roof. Once the pigeons were gone, Sonny was gone too. This was the way the agents figured out Sonny Black was dead. A month later, Sonny's girlfriend Judy reached out to Pistone, telling him that she was afraid. Pistone immediately had Judy brought down to Washington, D.C. where he met her. They had a lunch and Judy started crying, saying that she will miss Sonny. Pistone told her that he will miss Sonny also and that he loved Sonny. According to Judy, Sonny indeed couldn't believe Donnie was an agent for a long time, and he finally told her that he loved Donnie. Sonny also said he couldn't believe it after all the deep conversations he and Donnie had about life, as well as the brotherly bond they had. Pistone consoled Judy and told her that she could call him anytime. Later, they departed. By the way, Joe Massino was to say that Donnie Brasco wasn't the only reason for Sonny Black's death, that Sonny was in power struggle with Massino, and the Brasco incident was just an excuse for Massino to gain the upper hand against Sonny. Either way, this doesn't change the fact that Brasco operation was a major element in Sonny Black's fall. In the meantime, Tony Mirra was nowhere to be found, as he went on the lam the minute he heard of Donnie Brasco revelation. And Lefty got arrested right after the Bureau had confirmed he was going to be killed. Thus, in a way, Lefty was saved by the FBI. Tony Mirra didn't show up until March 1982 when he was called for a meeting by Joseph D'Amico. Upon his arrival, Mirra was shot in the head for 4 times in a parking garage. Some theories say that Mirra was killed for his possible cooperation with DAA, but that's a topic for another video. On August 2, 1982, Joe Pistone was on the witness stand to testify against the late Sonny Black and the others. This took place after Sonny's corpse was found, with his hands either cut off or rotten. Some theories say that they were cut off for shaking hands with a cop, but others say this was just a coincidence, for the corpse was thrown into the ocean, and the water caused the rotting of the hands. Pistone told he was sad to hear Sonny was dead, but happy for it was Sonny rather than himself. In 1981, Agent Pistone was back home, but there weren't any celebrations or big awards awaiting him. All he got was $500 bonus, which amounts to $1,000 today. Pistone quit the FBI in 1986 and lived his remaining life mostly in fear. The family often moved around and relocated, and they never used the name Pistone again. Although the operation had dealt a great blow to the Mafia, with dozens of trials, Pistone would suffer for the years he failed to spend with his family. At the end, the boss of Milwaukee Mafia family, Frank Balistrieri, got 13 years in prison. The Zip faction leader Cesare Bomentre was killed in 1984 because Joe Massino thought he was better off without him. From Sonny's crew, Booby got 5 years in prison, while Massino got 10, and the others received similar sentences. The operation also allegedly changed the initiation process of the Mafia. An old rule for making bones for membership, meaning having to kill for the family, was reportedly restored. For no agent could be authorized to carry out a mob hit. Also, from now on, at least 2 made members were required to watch for a candidate, on the grounds that they knew him for at least 15 years. Lefty Ruggiero swore he would kill Pistone one day, but before having any chance, he died of cancer while he was in prison in 1994. And the Bonanno family entered the 21st century under the leadership of Joe Massino. Ironically, Donnie Brasco sort of saved the Bonanno family from the commission case of the 1980s, for the Bonannos were kicked out of commission after the Donnie Brasco incident. While the leaders of Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, and Colombo families received long prison sentences, the Bonanno leadership was safe and sound since they were not a part of the commission. And according to my research, the Operation Donnie Brasco did not cause a lot of mobsters to receive long prison sentences. Those who got convicted received 10 years in prison at most, and mostly they had 5 to 6 years in prison. So I really doubt if it was worth Pistone's 6 years. One final thing is that although Sonny Black was just another mobster who committed lots of crimes, I would like you to debate if Pistone really betrayed him on moral grounds. I, for one, know that Pistone was just a law enforcer who was doing his job, but nonetheless, at some level, I feel like what he did to Sonny is still problematic. I would like to hear your opinions about this, so please do leave a comment. So this was the end of our Donnie Brasco episode. Thanks for watching, guys. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment.